next up, we have AB-1066, which addresses party inland water contact recreation sites for water quality monitoring. Luke Ginger from Hilda Bay is going to give us a summary of that legislation. If Nick's available, I know he's busy and is going to be floating in and out of our meeting this morning. He's also been working on the council side addressing AB 1066 since it's been passed. Luke?
Yeah, so I'll give you all a summary of what the bill is, and I'm going to try and put it into context. I'll give you a summary of what AB 1066 says and put it into context of other water quality monitoring legislation. Yeah, I can't give too many specifics on you know, the actual logistics of how AB 1066 will play out. We'll need Nick for that, but I'll at least be able to give you an overview. And since a lot of folks on this call probably don't know me, just to remind you, my name is Luke Ginger. I'm a staff scientist at Hilda Bay, and we're an environmental nonprofit based in Southern California. But the work I do is statewide, so I run our recreational water quality programs. The Beach Report Card is one you might have heard of, and that is West Coast wide, so from Tijuana all the way up to the Canadian border. So first, let's discuss AB 1066 and what the actual bill text says. So this was a bill that was signed into law. It was signed by Governor Newsom in October, and it was authored by Assembly Member Richard Bloom. And the two important excerpts that I've taken out of the text are that the Water Quality Monitoring Council, in consultation with local health officers and the public, will create a definition of a priority water contact recreation site. We'll get into a little bit more of what that means and what that entails. Second aspect of the bill is we will also make recommendations and requirements for the establishment of a priority water contact recreation site monitoring program. And if you want to see the full bill text, there's a link there. I believe it's also in the agenda. I'll also send it through the chat once I'm done with the presentation. But before we kind of move on with discussing AB 1066, I wanted to discuss a few other pieces of legislation that can kind of shed light on kind of how we got here, how AB 1066 came into being. And in order to do that, we have to start at AB 411, which was a bill passed in 1996. And most folks on this call are probably familiar with this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but basically it requires weekly monitoring at California beaches during the summer months from April through October. So someone has to go out and collect a sample. This picture here of someone collecting a sample, that's from Marin County, in case you were wondering. And the local health officers have to post advisories and post the data online. And I'm not exactly sure if signage is a requirement, but many beach managers do use signs on the beach. I know for ocean outfalls, there definitely need to be signs warning people. AB 411 also, deputized the county health agencies with conducting this monitoring. So the coastal counties of California do this monitoring with a few exceptions. The city of Long Beach being one, they have their own program, and then the East Bay Regional Park District, that's a combination of two different counties, Contra Costa and Alameda, working together to do their monitoring. So this is how it is kind of the work is spread around the state, if you will, which is significant, and we'll kind of come back to that later on. The other important piece of legislation that we need to talk about is the Beach Act, which was a federal piece of legislation passed in 2000. And this was not a monitoring mandate like AB-411 was in California. This was a bill that provided funding for monitoring programs in coastal states and Great Lakes states. So all the states you see here highlighted in blue, all the states and territories highlighted in blue are eligible for Beach Act funding and can use those funds for beach monitoring. And I believe most of these states do take advantage of that funding. I'm not exactly sure on all of them, haven't investigated all of that, but I know most of them do. So the one, I hate to call it an oversight because those pieces of legislation are big strides for public health, but one area where those bills do not cover or apply to are freshwater recreation sites that are not the Great Lakes. So any, rivers, lakes, streams, reservoirs, those areas are under AB 411 in California. They're not required to be monitored, and funding is not available for these types of water bodies through the Federal Beach Act. And if you think of California, California has many iconic, highly used freshwater recreation areas, Kern River, Klamath, Russian River, the Merced River, the list goes on. So people who go out to these very popular sites might be exposed to fecal pollution and they might not know it. So it's a public health risk there, particularly in California. So AB 1066 is, we'll kind of get to that later, but it's an attempt to reconcile that. And to put some numbers, I just throw some statistics at you about, how this is a public health issue. On an annual basis, 90 million people there are 90 million cases of recreational waterborne illness in the United States. That covers both fresh and marine waterborne illness, and that amounts to $3 billion in healthcare costs each year. And the CDC found that from 2018 to 2019, there were 43 waterborne illness outbreaks in California, specifically in freshwater recreation areas. This does not count swimming pools. This is, wild, outside freshwater recreation areas. And I'm not exactly sure what constitutes an outbreak, but an outbreak does consist of more than one individual. So the number of people impacted by these outbreaks was more than 43. So this is a public health issue, and it's an issue that has been recognized by health departments across the state. So right now, the freshwater monitoring that does happen is kind of in this patchwork across the state. It's not as cohesive as beach monitoring is at the moment. So I listed here some agencies, to my knowledge, that are doing freshwater monitoring. I apologize if I'm not aware of your program. These are just the ones that I was aware of. So there is monitoring across the state, south to north, including the LA area. I know someone from LA San is on the call, so shout out to them. And Sacramento County has the American River monitoring program. And there are many tribal-led programs across the state and nonprofit programs across the state, like the Water Keepers or Surf Rider. So it's great that there is monitoring happening, even though there is no mandate that it needs to happen. And it's great that these organizations are using money from their budgets to do this. So we're happy to see that. But again, we need more cohesion and standardization across the state. So to kind of help highlight what I mean by that, I'll give you the example of our monitoring program and kind of how we, figured out some of the shortcomings of freshwater monitoring in California. So just briefly, what we do is we hire local college students to go out and collect samples, fecal indicator samples throughout LA County. We do it in Malibu Creek State Park and the LA River. And we also aggregate data from other agencies that collect water quality samples. And we take that data and turn it into a water quality grade, which we provide to the public. And in doing this work, we've kind of discovered that there are many recreation sites that go unmonitored. So Malibu Creek State Park has 2 pretty popular swimming holes in it. And if we weren't going out there and collecting those samples, there wouldn't be any samples getting collected there. So those are very popular sites, and folks would, unintentionally get exposed to fecal pollution, possibly. So there are a lot of sites that go unmonitored. We've also noticed that data is not stored in one place. When we do our grades, we have to scour a few different websites and collect the data from them. There's no centralized location for all that information. We've also noticed that different organizations use different water quality objectives. So the state of California has recreational water quality objectives, but they're not necessarily followed by everyone. So some organizations use the limited Rec 1 standard instead of the Rec 1 standard. Many kind of ignore the geometric mean component of the water quality objectives. And also, to my knowledge, I don't think anybody's using beach action values, which for folks who don't know what those are maybe a more strict objective that the EPA gives you the option to use as a beach manager. So again, we've kind of noticed this lack of standardization amongst the monitoring programs across the state. Also, sampling schedules are different. Some folks go out a few times a week, others go every other week, and everything in between. So it's because of all these shortcomings that we were interested in AB-1066, which was being authored by Assemblymember Richard Bloom. Kind of started in the summer of 2020. So we were very interested in this bill because it initially set out to be a monitoring mandate like AB 411 was, but kind of through the legislative process, it got scaled back. So, Heal the Bay's ultimate goal is to have a monitoring mandate in place, but AB 1066 is not that. It's more, the way we see it, it's more of a stepping stone to that. So let's look at some of the specifics of the bill and kind of the timeline of it, to kind of put on everybody's radar and let you know what you can expect out of this. So by July of 2022, the Water Quality Monitoring Council will have to create a work group or task an existing work group with some of this work. So this work group will have to create a definition of a freshwater recreation site, which we'll get into a little bit more on how difficult that might be. And this work group will also recommend a monitoring program for recreation sites. And again, I'll get into what that means a little bit more later. A year after that, in July 2023, the work group must submit a report to the Water Quality Monitoring Council. The report will contain the definition and the monitoring recommendation. And then December 2023, the Water Quality Monitoring Council will submit a report to the State Board for approval. So that means, if the State Board approves of these things, then they will, this will be the definition for a freshwater recreation site that the state of California recognizes. And it will also recognize this monitoring program format that the work group creates as, a good monitoring program statewide. So that's what AB 1066 has in store for all of us for the next few years. Next, I kind of wanted to dive into these two requirements, the work that the work group will do, and kind of flesh out some of the difficulties and challenges of this work that kind of lay ahead. And hopefully that will spur some discussion amongst everybody here. So first, let's take a look at some of the challenges when it comes to defining freshwater recreation sites. Number one, when we're talking about freshwater recreation areas, there's just such a wide variety in the physical features and morphology of the water body types, especially compared to ocean beaches. I think there's just a wider variety in freshwater. So it could be a little creek, or it could be a reservoir, or a natural lake, or a hot spring. Freshwater recreation areas can take all sorts of different shapes and sizes. And there's also the matter of usage of freshwater recreation sites, which adds another kind of layer of complexity to it. They're used for all sorts of different things. They're used for recreational activities, cultural activities, as well as sustenance. So I think these are all uses that we need to take into account when we're defining freshwater recreation sites. Does it apply strictly to recreation, or should it also apply to cultural and sustenance uses? So I believe the San Diego Regional Water Board just started looking into tribal beneficial uses of water bodies down in their area. So I would say that's definitely something that should be looked at in this process. And in terms of sustenance, Heal the Bay, we do a lot of work around LA County, informing the anglers out at the fishing piers in the ocean, educating them on which fish to avoid, or how much fish they should be consuming of certain kinds for public health reasons. And what we've found is that most of the folks that we encounter are fishing for sustenance. So they are fishing to put food on the table. So I think that's a significant use that we should consider in this process. We also have to look at priority areas in terms of recreation sites. So Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian communities historically have not been provided protection against harmful pollutants. And that especially applies here, where the coastal communities have benefited from AB 411 for over 30 years, or not quite 30 years, for about 25 years now. But those same health protections have not been provided to communities more inland, or communities that don't have access to coastal areas. So we need to take into account the community that's using freshwater recreation sites. That's an important aspect of this bill. And then there's also the matter of visitation and remoteness. How much use renders a recreation site basically, and is there a site that's too remote to monitor? Those are all things to consider here. So to kind of shed light on where we might find answers to some of those challenges or questions, let's take a look at AB-411 and kind of how that bill addresses this. Kind of use AB-411 as a roadmap, if you will. So in AB-411, it requires all ocean beaches with 50,000 or more annual visitors to be monitored, and it requires all outfalls to be monitored. So those are the only two criteria to monitor at ocean beaches. So 50,000 or more visitors, that's a pretty low threshold as far as ocean beaches go, especially in Southern California. But for a freshwater recreation site, that's probably pretty high. The two swimming holes I mentioned in Malibu, those are pretty popular freshwater sites, and I don't think they hit 50,000 visitors in a summer, but those swimming holes are filled, every day in the summer. So that threshold would have to be, looked at, or is a visitation threshold even applicable to these recreational areas? And then in terms of outfalls, there are many outfalls across the state on the beaches, but I think there are probably a lot more outfalls in the freshwater bodies across California, especially where you have a lot of channelized water bodies like the LA River. If we were to monitor every outfall in the river, that would be pretty impossible, I would say. There are thousands of outfalls across the entire length of the river there. So that probably applies to the San Gabriel River and San Diego River, etc. So outfall monitoring is also another challenge that kind of lays ahead for AB-1066. Next, let's look at the other aspect of the bill, which is monitoring program recommendations. So what would a monitoring program look like at these freshwater recreation areas? So we have to look at things like the bacteria objectives that should be used. So I mentioned that the state of California has bacteria objectives, but we always have the option of going more strict than those objectives. So, do we add another indicator, or, do we use a beach action value? Does it depend on water body type? Also, sampling frequency is something to take into account. I mentioned ocean beaches are sampled weekly from April through October, so we have to see if that's appropriate or something more or less frequent. And then the number of appropriate monitoring locations, which is probably the trickier thing out of these three. Again, because of the different sizes and shapes that these water bodies have. So if you have a length of river, like on the left side, how far apart should samples be? If you have people fishing and kayaking along the entire stretch, how far spaced out should those samples be? Or if you have more of a stagnant kind of water hole like you have on the right, is one sample good here? Should there be two sampling locations at that site? Those are all things that we'll have to answer. And again, let's take a look at AB-411 and see what AB-411 did with that type of challenge. So first, AB-411 requires weekly monitoring, like I mentioned. For any beach locations that don't have an outfall, it's kind of up to the beach manager discretion to place those out and come up with a cadence of monitoring locations along a beach. So the outfall definitely has to be monitored, but it's the between the outfall locations that are up to their discretion. So to give you an example, on the left side, this is Baker Beach in San Francisco, and they collect one sample at a creek mouth, and technically that would fulfill the requirements of AB-411. But then they have another monitoring site a little bit down coast from there. So again, the beach managers here have just decided to collect a second one there to be safer. And on the right side, this is Ocean Beach, also in San Francisco. And there aren't too many outfalls on the beach itself. I think you have to go a little bit further south to get those. So they've kind of placed monitoring locations. I'm not exactly sure how far apart they are, maybe a quarter mile, half a mile, something like that. So they've deemed that to be safe enough. AB 411 also says that water quality advisories need to be made public and online, make that data available to everybody free of charge online, and then I think they require signage. I'm not exactly sure. And then AB 411 also mandates that the data be uploaded to the Beachwatch database, which is the state's recreational water quality monitoring database. And I really do think that I know some agencies upload their freshwater data to this database. So, you know, if we're talking about AB 1066, I think this is a state resource we can easily utilize here. You know, have the freshwater data just uploaded there. So that way, freshwater and marine data is all in one spot. You can't miss it. And then to kind of wrap things up, there are a few other hurdles that are going to be involved in AB 1066 work that I've just kind of pinned here. So the first thing is there are going to be some jurisdictional issues here. There are a lot of water bodies in national parks and Forest Service land and state parks, municipal and private land as well. So when it comes to who is responsible for monitoring these locations or who has access to these locations for monitoring, that will be something that needs to get figured out. And I'm not sure that AB 411 has a real answer for this one. It kind of goes unaddressed in terms of ocean monitoring. So to use state parks as an example, Candlestick Point, which I believe is state park land, that does get monitored, but Big Sur, beaches in Big Sur do not get monitored. So there's a bit of inconsistency there. In terms of national park land, I think Redwood National Park butts up against the ocean. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. But that stretch of shoreline up in Humboldt County does not get monitored either, the national park section of it. So, there's kind of that jurisdictional issue. For freshwater areas, you know, a big waterway that probably should get monitored is the Merced River in Yosemite National Park. The other hurdle is cost. So when the work group recommends what a monitoring program should look like, cost will definitely need to be taken into account. And again, freshwater monitoring does not have any federal funding for it, and there's no state funding for it at the moment. So cost is going to be a big issue when it comes to creating a recommendation for a monitoring program. And then there are also some kind of gray area water body types that need to be thought about as well, like brackish water or hot springs. So in this picture this is the end of the LA River here, and this is an estuary, and it's a pretty popular fishing spot and kayaking spot. So what happens to locations like this or hot springs as well? So to kind of summarize everything, I'll just kind of breeze through this. AB 1066 will define recreation sites and recommend a monitoring program. It will be challenging because of the diversity of freshwater bodies and their usages. And AB 411 definitely serves as a good roadmap. It doesn't provide all the answers by any means, but it's a good roadmap. And we do know that success of AB 1066 will rely on support from, inland beach managers, any folks involved in freshwater monitoring already, or health agencies in areas where there is freshwater recreation. So with that, I will take any questions anybody has. I believe we have a few minutes for that. So
Yes,
yeah, any questions for me?
Yeah, you posted a few things. Is there anything that you'd like to share?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, this is Nick Martorano, the director of the Water Quality Monitoring Council. I've been working with this bill since it was kind of first started. I missed a big chunk of it because I was out on paternity leave. So by the time I came back, it was already kind of in its final form. But you can see how it's, by going to that one link that Luke provided, see how it's morphed from earlier last year to now. I would say that AB-411 is kind of what it was based on, but I would say that AB-411 is more of a cautionary tale than a success story. I would say that I think you mischaracterized it a little bit about the breadth of beaches covered by that. You have to be 50,000 visitors in within 50 feet of an outfall. Both have to be true for you to be part of that bill. So the scope of the coastal monitoring is actually really small. And the bill goes on to further state that if state doesn't provide funding, then this is non-funded mandate, really. So there's a lot, and it only requires winter weather sampling. So it's got some stuff to learn from, but I also think that there is a lot that we can utilize by the folks that have been participating in this program for the last 25 years to make it AB-1066 as successful as possible. We're working through the budget process now that it has passed. That's all confidential, but you can see there was a fiscal analysis done as part of this bill. It's public. I wish I had been part of those conversations because, in my opinion, it's pretty limiting for what the council and what the state board can do, because it's so short-sighted to the few calendar deadlines that Luke pointed out, the 2023 and the formation of a work group, and then the report development within a year, and then basically present that as they say consideration to the water board, but I think that really means presenting to the water board, and then kind of they're hoping that some sort of follow-on legislation would come, or maybe it would be concurrent. But I mean, I see this as potentially being a long-term program that needs to be treated as such, so just because of the scope of inland water bodies. It's going to be difficult, and I don't think it's going to be as easy, for the reasons Luke pointed out, to just give a few urban Department of Public Health funding to do sampling and reporting, because of the jurisdictional issue and just the amount of rivers and lakes and streams that could be included. So we'll see what happens. There was some funding to help us meet these first legislative requirements, which is something. You can't shake a stick at that, so I'm happy that there's something there. So we'll see how that goes. The next deadline for that is basically January, when the governor releases his budget, and then hopefully that we can start moving forward with trying to get somebody to help lead the work groups, because that's what's in AB-1066. They basically, in the fiscal analysis, give public health and water boards some resources to help co-chair this work group. And I think that's where this group is going to become more integral, because we're going to need to populate that work group with people that are experts in this field of monitoring, that they know what works, what doesn't work, and some of the needs that we're not going to know, or these people aren't going to know. So developing these really big decisions is going to require a wide swath of members to participate on that work group when that does get started next year. So I would just say, I encourage you all to read the bill. It's not long, and then take a look at the fiscal analysis to see what we're going to be probably dealing with as far as resources to help support this, and then support follow-on legislation as appropriate, because it's basically, you would hope, the way it's been worded and the way it's been pared down, is that the next step would be to create a more established program for the protection of public health. And there's opportunities, I think, to coordinate with harmful algal bloom monitoring, which is a new program that just started finally last year. So there's opportunities to use multiple work groups in this to help make it a success, hopefully moving forward.
Alicia, do you have any thing that you'd like to add? Do we have a meeting coming up for the inland work group?
Yeah, no, not at this time, but I think, yeah, as we start to figure out what will need to be done, I think there's, yeah, a lot of people that would be interested in providing input, and I think Luke did a really good job of framing some of the questions that need to be answered and the challenges.